I wanted to take a look at something a little different today, specifically this video that I found that was suggested to me on YouTube about the terms railway station and train station. In it, a man who I understand is a train enthusiast, the channel is called Trains, Trains, Trains. He's not a linguist, he's a train guy. He's talking about the terms railway station and train station, and he's titled the video Why British English is Losing the Battle. So what he's concerned about here is that what he sees as the traditional British term railway station is losing out to this insurgent Americanism train station. He's making two basic points through the video, as we'll see. The first one, that the term railway station, which he prefers, is somehow more beautiful, more poetic, or it has some special romantic connotation. His second basic point would be that the term railway station is somehow objectively better, that it's either more descriptive or more logical or better in some other way in its relationship with the thing that it signifies. I have to say that I've used the term train station all my life. So if this is a change that's happening, then it seems to be pretty advanced already and probably beyond the point of no return. Let's, however, take a little look at Google Ngram. So this is a tool that can show us, and I'll just set it to all English here. It's a tool that shows us the relative frequency of words in a corpus of written English. The fact that it's written English is possibly relevant here. So in all English, you can indeed see that the term railway station was in the past much more common relatively than it is now. And the term train station has really taken off and has overtaken railway station in the 1990s. If we look specifically at the American English corpus that they use, you will see that change really took off in the 60s and 70s, and by 1984, train station was the dominant term in the United States, or at least in the American English corpus. And if we check British English, we'll see that change is a little bit delayed. It really takes off in the 90s, the term train station, and becomes the dominant term right around the turn of the millennium. So I'm happy to accept that he does have a point, that the term train station is taking over. Having accepted that, and accepting that the guy knows what he's talking about here, let's have a little look at the video and hear some of the arguments that he makes as to why he doesn't like this.
The railway station, a place of grandeur, history and sophistication. A term so deeply rooted in British heritage that you can almost hear the steam whistle and the call for the 4:30 to Paddington.
Okay, so the railway station is established here as a place of grandeur, history and sophistication. Whereas the train station, he's going to suggest in a moment, is not. Unfortunately, he shows us in the video one of the grandest and most historic stations in the world, New York's Grand Central Station, which the locals would presumably call a train station. So then there's clearly nothing in the word railway station or train station that denotes grandeur. That there's not one of these words that refers to something that's grand and the other word doesn't refer to something that's grand. That's not something that's in the words themselves or even in the relationship between the word and the thing that they signify. We know that they're not because we would call all kinds of station by the same name. We could be looking at a central terminus like St Pancras or Euston or King's Cross, or we could be looking at some small rural station or a modern suburban station, and I think the presenter would argue that they should all be called railway stations. So there's not a difference here between the railway station, which is the grand one, and then something else, which is the not grand one. All that I'm trying to establish here is that there's not something in the word railway station itself that directly refers to something grand. Therefore, we can understand that any notions of sophistication, history, and grandeur attached to these terms are in the speaker's own experience. It's not that he's imagined them, that is very real for him, but it's not necessarily something that is shared by a broader speech community. Now, to be completely clear, I think it's great that people cherish architecture and history, and the railways in particular. I think it's really interesting, and I think there is something romantic and special about trains. Where I differ with the presenter of this video is that I don't particularly pin that romantic notion to the word that we use to talk about a train station or a railway station.
But wait, what's this? The train station. How did this cheeky Americanism sneak in? And why, oh why, is it slowly taking over the UK? Let's wind the clock back. In the early 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution was at full steam, pun intended, the British built the world's first railway systems. And naturally, where there were railways, there had to be railway stations. The term was literal, stations built for the railways, a grand innovation that connected cities like never before.
The term was literal. Stations built for the railways. Is train station any less literal? Are they not also stations built for trains? What do we call a station on a road where you can catch a bus? Is it a road station or a bus station? So he's trying to make an argument here that railway station is somehow an objectively better term. It isn't. It's no more logical or more descriptive or more useful than train station. Even if it were a more logical or useful term, those are not always our guiding lights in matters lexical. Language can be illogical, chaotic, random, but in this case it isn't.
It was all about the rail lines that these magnificent locomotives chugged along. In America, however, they had a different approach. Railroad station was the common term until they decided that was too much effort and whittled it down to train station.
Railroad station was too much effort. It could be that simplifying and shortening things is often a part of language change. I think we probably all know that intuitively. You can probably think of many examples. It's not always the shortest and most concise term that wins out over time, but that could be one factor here. Yes, absolutely. We say train station because it's shorter. Yeah, it could be.
You know, keep things simple. After all, you don't ride the rails, you ride the train, right?
Very good point. You don't ride the rails, you ride the train. We have more of a connection to the train than to the rails. It's the train that we touch and that we see. It's the train that we wait for. It's the train that we spend time in. So, yes, but that defeats his previous point a little, doesn't it? That gives us a reason other than laziness and brevity to choose train station over railway station.
Logical, efficient, very American. But here's the problem. That streamlined term somehow jumped across the pond. Today,
is that necessarily a problem? That the term jumped across the pond, that it came across the Atlantic from North America to Britain? That in itself doesn't seem like a problem to me. I mean this with genuine good faith and an intent to understand. Are we able to articulate what the problem is with terms coming from outside into our version of the language? To be completely clear, I'm not saying that he's wrong. I don't feel particularly attached to the term railway station, but there probably are other words that I would feel that way about. My only question is, why do we have that feeling? Why is it a problem?
Today, more and more Brits are calling their beloved railway stations train stations. It's a slow erosion of the once untouchable British vocabulary.
The once untouchable British vocabulary. When was the British vocabulary untouchable? To what extent even is there a British vocabulary? And was it untouchable when the Angles, Saxons and Jutes brought their tribal tongues over? Was it when they mixed with the local Britons and the Celtic languages that were spoken before, albeit with a healthy infusion of Latin loanwords from centuries of Roman occupation? Was it the great British untouchable vocabulary when the Norsemen landed and established the Danelaw? Was the great British vocabulary untouchable before or after the Norman conquest? Was it during the exploration of the world in the Elizabethan period, the language that Shakespeare, among many others, wrote down for us? The reality, of course, is that language is changing all the time. It has to change because there are always new inventions, new practices, new ideas, new concepts. The only languages whose vocabulary is untouchable are dead languages. Part of that is that new words sometimes replace old ones, sometimes even to refer to the same thing. If you don't like that, then answer me this. If you could take a snapshot of the language and freeze it forever, then what moment would you choose to capture? At what point in the evolution of the language was it perfect?
Maybe it's down to globalization, or perhaps the omnipresence of American media.
Those are real things, and they do affect the way that we speak. I don't mean to take anything away from that at all.
If James Bond ever orders a side of fries with his fish, we'll know we're doomed. But here's the sad part. It's not just the word. When we lose railway station, we lose the sense of history that comes with it. Railway station conjures images of soot-covered engineers, long platforms, and ornate ironwork. Train station? That sounds like a place you rush through with a cup of bad coffee, barely noticing the architecture.
It's not just the word that's lost, is his argument here. I disagree. I think it is just the word. The connotations that he's describing here, to be honest, they don't ring true to me. Maybe they do for other people, maybe they do for many people. If they do, and people feel that that's something important, then they will retain the term railway station. If not, then it will probably be lost. Or maybe the two terms will continue to exist in parallel for a long time. It's not that the connotations of the terms railway station and train station here are not real. It's more that I'm not sure how broadly they are shared among a community of speakers. Maybe part of this is that this feeling, these connotations that the term railway station has that train station doesn't, maybe these connotations are quite common within a smaller group, within train enthusiasts and railway enthusiasts. I'm just not sure about that.
And yet, train station is creeping into official UK use. Once you hear it on the BBC, you know it's over. The battle for the language might already be lost. So
Battle for the language. I think insofar as there is a battle for the language, the English have generally done pretty well out of it. In reality, it's very hard to get people to use one word over another. People are going to say what they will.
what's next? Are we going to call it a subway instead of the tube?
Well, that's particularly ironic, especially since a tenet of his whole video is that he's appealing to historical usage, right? We should call it X because that's what we've always called it, or because that's an older version, an older term. The name Subway has its origins in Britain, not in America. The Glasgow subway was opened in 1896 and it was called the Subway. That dates it to before the opening of any similar system in the US. I think Boston was the first subway in the United States the following year. But the name Subway has been used in Britain for almost 130 years. The London Underground is, of course, older. I don't know exactly when the term tube was coined. I found one source dating it to about 1900. Either way, in Britain, the terms tube and subway are of a similar age. Anyway, this is pointless because nobody is calling the London Underground the subway. That's not happening. The London Underground has a really strong brand. It's a really entrenched name. American tourists go to London and buy Mind the Gap t-shirts. The London Underground is widely known as the Tube, and it's also completely iconic globally. There is absolutely no danger, no threat, no chance of either the name Underground or Tube being replaced by Subway anyway. And on the previous joke about James Bond ordering a side of fries with his fish, that's actually quite funny. It underlines that this video is all in good fun, and of course that's absolutely fine. I enjoyed it, I found it interesting. I was just a little bit triggered by the linguistic inaccuracy of some of it, which I think does represent the way that a lot of people think about language sometimes. This idea that it should be static and that change is always invasive or erosive. Okay, I think that's quite enough of this. I'm going to get some fish and fries.